By the way, depending how things go, we're going to open up the floor to any questions from you as well. So hang on to that.
Okay, so organizer note, if you are a vegan single, looking for other vegan singles, to go to the back corner of the hall. So to start the panel, we're going to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves. You all have microphones, that's wonderful. And as you introduce yourself, maybe tell you why you're interested in the question of just society in Canada. We'll start with Alexa. So we get mics on.
Mics are on. Now the mic is on. Test, check. There we go. Good morning. It's really good to be here. I'm a mom. I'm a citizen of Canada, but I'm also a United Church minister. But I do a lot of my work out in the streets, in outreach, and at the intersections of where all of these issues come and they collide and they cause a tremendous amount of suffering. So one of the reasons I'm interested in conversations like this is because the people that I work with don't have a tremendous amount of power in terms of
no, I haven't had it queued up yet.
but they do have
just give me, yeah, hold this, thank you.
lived experience, and I've noticed over the years the ways in which when we organize and have conversations like this, and when we organize, we can actually change the narrative in the country. We can actually make a more just society, and we can stop managing the problem, which is what a lot of
Spaces I occupy. Oh,
lost some mind.
lost power. And I use yours.
Thank you. Someone doesn't want to hear about how we're going to move from managing problems to actually looking at the roots of them and making this society more just at the roots of the problem themselves. So I think that's what I'll say. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me back? Okay. So my name is Adrian Harewood, and I'm a professor at the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. Prior to that, I was a journalist for about 20 years for CBC. And I'm also a father. I'm also a citizen. I'm a member of this Ottawa community. I come from a family, I come from a community that has always felt that it's important to try to create communities of care and communities of justice. Communities of care where you are concerned and you are in solidarity with other people, particularly people who are the marginalized in society. So I have always tried to live up to what I believe to be my obligations as a member of the community, as a citizen, and also just recognizing some of the kind of core inequalities that are endemic in this society. It's incumbent upon me to try to use whatever skills I have or power I have to change that.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. My name is Ryan Banfield. I am a member of the Ottawa Youth Council. I'm one of the older members of the council at 23 years old. And the Ottawa Youth Council was set up by the city and is based out of the not-for-profit group Youth Ottawa. And it's basically a council that is meant to provide a way for youth to provide input on all affairs conducted by the municipal government, the City of Ottawa, that concern youth. Everything from transport to housing to parks, environment, anything that's under municipal jurisdiction, it has an impact on youth, and the Youth Council is there to provide impact on it, input on it. I also have a background in volunteering at a soup kitchen, a food bank, various advocacy groups, and I'm also just a big politics nerd. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about this, especially with multiple people on stage who I've written about the works of in my university papers. And when it comes to the question of why I'm interested in discussing a just society, basically, as a big politics nerd, the most satisfying aspect of politics is working towards improving people's lives through the means of policy. I'm a big social policy fan, I'm a big intergovernmental relations fan, And all of those means are basically just working towards the end of trying to make society more just.
Yeah, I'm just told him to connect his
And so
laptop there,
ultimately,
and then he'll play
the
it.
just society is basically just the extension of all of my political
sure, thank you.
interests and fascinations.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maxime Bernier. I'm the leader of the People's Party of Canada. You may know the People's Party is a new political party. We created that party in 2018, 6 years ago, and we created that party based on 4 principles: individual freedom, personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. And all our policies and our electoral platform is based on these 4 principles. So we want to have a smaller government that will give you more freedom. We believe when you're free, you must be responsible of your actions, the good ones and the bad ones. So we don't think that the government is the solution to all our economic and social problems. Sometimes the government is a problem. So thank you very much.
It's a lofty subject, a just society, a just Canada. A little bit more to shine a light on that is what here Elliott Trudeau had to say about Canada being a just society. You can look at the screen.
For me, this beautiful, rich, and energetic country of ours can become a model of the just society in which every citizen will enjoy his fundamental rights, in which 2 great linguistic communities and peoples of many cultures will live in harmony. C'est ça, le Canada.
Lofty subject, a just society. The word elusive is part of this panel discussion. Is it elusive to have a just society? Are we not living in one?
Yeah, a just society is something that we are dreaming of. I prefer to have a fair society. I prefer that, we have in our constitution the principle of the rule of law. The rule of law is everybody must be equal under the law. And when you want to create a just society, sometimes you give privileges to some people and not to others. So for me right now, we don't have a just society because it's not everybody that is equal under the law. For example, if you remember what happened during the COVID hysteria, you have some groups of our society, the non-vaccinated people, who didn't have the same rights as the vaccinated people. That was unfair, that was unconstitutional, that was not just. So it's why we need to be sure to give more freedom to people. They'll be able to choose what they want to do. But right now, with a big government in Ottawa and at the provincial level, we are kind of a slave because we are working 6 months for the government, for the municipal government, for the provincial government, for the federal government, with all your taxes. So the government is telling you, do what you want to do for your life, but we're going to tax you 100% of your income the first 6 months of the year.
What about the sound? The
so
sound
that's
works
not
too?
fair.
Sound, okay.
And I believe that it's against also economic freedom. Because when you have more economic freedom,
make it
you have
full
more
screen and,
prosperity. And that John F. Kennedy said, economic freedom and prosperity is like a high tide. When you have a high tide, all boats will lift, the small ones and the big ones.
Yeah.
So now in our society, we are dividing people by groups. And if you are in the good groups, you'll have more privileges. And if you are in the bad one, you won't have these privileges. So for us, everybody must be equal under the law.
Is it playing?
And that's why I'm
need sound now?
Oh yeah, we need the sound as well. Oh yeah, thank you.
Everyone is equal under the law. But surely you would agree. Everyone is equal under the law. But surely you would agree.
Really low, no?
You can put it higher. It's, we want everybody to hear. I think.
Now, at the time they are talking?
Oh no! We're gonna stop them talking and then we're gonna play the video.
Okay,
They'll all be
okay,
quiet.
give me
Yeah,
just a second.
Once it's ready. Yeah. And you can make it full screen, right? The YouTube video.
You know, I didn't have the right to travel across the country because I didn't choose to have the vax and take that. So that was a choice.
Let's start with needs. First of all,
Oh hey, nice to see you.
we all have some basic.
Oh, you got one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but
So some of the basic needs, include things like food. So food is something that all of us need.
yeah, so what you're saying right now is, you know, everybody must have the right to have education. Everybody must have the right to have food on their plate.
Would you agree?
Everybody must have the right to have a house or something like that. No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because that's not a right. That's that's not a right. If you think that you have a right for a job or you have a right for education, that means that I have an obligation to give you that right. So that kind of right is an obligation on me to take my money and giving
So,
you what you want.
I'm
So
gonna
that's
jump
why
in
it's not a real right.
I think that's a very interesting discussion. Is when we're talking about giving things to people in society.
Good.
What does it look like if society is actually organized to provide? So one of the things, you know, you're talking about.
We are ready with the video, so
I
whenever
also
it's quiet,
spent
it's
a lot of
fine.
time thinking
Like,
about
not ready,
maybe
maybe.
let's see, you can maybe take the first answer and we'll kind of move along here. But we did not give people food to isolate, right? We expected people to leave their apartments to go and buy food. And why didn't we think as a society that maybe everyone should get some rice and some flour and some eggs as a base? That wasn't even in the conversation. So I'm interested in this giving and taking, but in a society, if we build our own structures to say this is what we give ourselves, does that get us closer to a just society?
Oh, okay. So what I think we're talking about is narratives around freedoms and rights and describing them and just defining them, right? What is a right and what is not a right? And I want to, for me, we can argue statistics, but I live and will for the rest of my life with a man who lives inside my head. His name is Nelson, and he was a single father who had a great job. He got injured on his job. He lost his housing, lived out of his car. Ended up having to rent an Airbnb to see his kid on weekends. When that failed, he lived with me. When that failed, he lived inside the shelter. And when that happened, he lost all hope and he took his life. He died from depression. And he was one of the 300,000 people in 2020 that had lost their right to housing, right? And we have to define what we're talking about, I think, as rights, as opposed to the things that we can accumulate and own and earn, right? And we're talking about food justice and food security. I work with a number of people, 1 in 10 right now, in Toronto need the food bank. So when I think before we go too far, it's what rights are we talking about? What narrative do we have for our country? And I'd be curious to know sort of how we lay that foundation for ourselves today, because I think we're going to actually end up having two separate conversations.
Yeah, I think that before we even talk about rights, and Mr. Bernier was talking about rights, I think at a fundamental level, we have to talk about needs. Right? So what does it mean? Needs, right? So what does it mean to be a human being?
Yeah.
Right? What does it mean to be a human being? What do human beings need in order to live? Right? So for example, Mr. Bernier, I would imagine that you would agree that there's a need for hospitals in this society. Right? There's a need for hospitals, right? Or there's a need for police health care. Right? There's a need for health care because all of us, our health is our most important asset. Right? All of us person who knows how to fix that. All of us need that kind of, at a very basic level, all of us need that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that you would disagree. You would agree that we need these kinds of filters or these kinds of services to provide for people's basic needs. That's the first thing I'd like to establish. You agree with that?
Can I answer?
Yeah, right.
As you please, but what I'm saying is it must not be the government going to give these services. It can be the private sector. Now we have a healthcare system that is not functioning. It's a big bureaucratic socialist system, and we need to put more competition. Yes, we need to have hospital in a society, but that can be decided by the private sector. It will give a better service than the government. Your solution must always come from the government. My solution is coming from the people and not the government. So if you ask people here in the crowd, if they have a good service and when they go to the hospital, I doubt that it will be the best one. We have the longest waiting times for surgeries in Canada, in the OECD countries, because we don't have competition. Competition brings more, services and better services. So
To still maintain some semblance of quality of life through potentially a mix of social services and privatization, as you say, and some difficult choices have to be made. The choice that's probably the one that aged most poorly is the defunding of social housing, social and affordable housing, because as we know now, that has ultimately led to rents increasing endlessly, hence the housing crisis that we're in today, which I'm sure will be a much more extensively discussed topic throughout this panel discussion here. And, this is a situation where a just society is elusive because the constraints on the situation made it so that there really was no good choice. I don't think that the Jean Chrétien government are the villains of our time. I think that they had to make a bad choice out of many different bad choices when they ultimately decided to pull all the federal funding out of
It's not showing the YouTube, it's showing like desktop.
But this has had lasting impacts in terms of rising rents.
Just put YouTube on.
And so it's having to make a bad choice out of multiple bad choices, having no good choice available. That is what makes a just society elusive in a lot of cases. But the reason why I think that it is not worthwhile, it's still worth it to try.
Can you just project the desktop? Then you can just go there and play YouTube. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, just go there. Yeah.
Plenty of cities in Canada that are experimenting with different models to
You have Google Chrome?
reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness in Canada through different systems of coordination, different models of collaboration between the municipal government and various non-profit
Just project the desktop.
Yours, for example. And this has actually, it's yielded many negative results, but it's yielded positive results in cities like Medicine Hat, cities like St. Thomas Elgin, or that's a county, and London, Ontario's in some ways going in the right direction when it comes to veteran homelessness as well. And none of us here would say that's not worthwhile to do. Even from an ideological stance, I'm sure you wouldn't say that it's not worthwhile to do because it actually involves outsourcing a lot of responsibility to not-for-profits and allowing them to really kind of take the lead in a lot of cases. And so when it comes to dealing with some sort of issue that just embodies just how bad Canadian society can be, just how bad it can get, like when it comes to endlessly rising rents, like when it comes to the prevalence of homelessness, which largely is driven by rising rents. Yes, a just society is difficult. It's impossible to reach totally, but it is still worth searching for because it can still help a lot of people.
Adrian, add to that, but I'm just thinking, you're talking about homeless issue. I'm from Kingston. We have several homeless encampments. Ottawa does too. This is going on across Canada in every city. 10 years ago, we never heard about this before. People living in parks, in tents. It's now, like I said, happening in every city across Canada. It's something that happened after World War II. Nora can elaborate. We haven't
this is a very rich country. This is a country also that produces an enormous amount of food. So how is it possible in a country as rich as this, in a country that produces as much food as it does, that 1 in 4 people in this country at this very moment live in some form of food insecurity?
Money.
Right? That doesn't make any sense. Right? And that it can't be just that hundreds of thousands of kids, right? They could be your children, right? They could be your children. They could be your children or my children, right? Ordinary kids. Hundreds of thousands of children are going to school hungry every day. In the society that I imagine, just society, that could not be. Right? It cannot be acceptable. Right? That people are going to bed hungry every day in a country as rich as that. That is not justice to me.
If you ask me the question, I believe that I'm in charge of my children and I'm responsible of them, so I will do everything for them to have food, education, and all that. It's not the federal government to do that. Actually,
what happens if you die? What happens if you die?
No,
if you die tomorrow.
Let me finish. You know, everything that you're saying, there's a cost. There's no free lunch in our society. And when you say that the country is rich, the country is not rich. We have a huge deficit at the global level, a huge debt, and now the poor are paying for that with the inflation tax. When you have that deficit, we have inflation. Inflation is the worst of all taxes because for the poor, they're going to pay for everything that they're going to spend, and you know that a poor person will spend more money for the things that are necessary for their life than the rich people. So if you want to help the poor, you must stop that inflation, and the way to do that is to stop spending money that we don't have and create that inflation at the first step.
You're not making the conversation. That's not the conversation.
Find the desktop.
It's a conversation because we want to help the poor, and I want to help the poor also.
I wanna jump
but the
in.
government is not helping right now, and the government is not the solution, it is the problem.
I want to jump to 2 things. The clapping is fine, but I'm afraid it's hard to hear in this room.
Because I tried to
Yes,
bring them.
No, it's okay. You know, that's them. They're free to do what they want to do.
People are allowed to clap, but I want to make sure people can hear, because that's much more important than the clapping, okay? Because I'm sure everybody is saying stuff on the stage that's making 1 or 2 people want to clap. So let's just kind of be aware that we're in a boxy hall. I mean, one of the realities of inflation is it's not driven by government spending.
Explain me why.
It's driven, the last inflationary increase that we just had was driven by
Can you hold this?
profits.
Just, hold this
And it
up.
was by profits.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, this is true. It's driven by profits, right? In 8 industries, and the 8 industries that drove inflation, like half of the inflationary increases came from home heating, from repairs of cars, from groceries. This is true.
No, this is not.
And we can say it's fake, but I mean,
I'm not saying
economists
it's
have.
fake.
Okay.
Let's just have an economic 101 course on the inflation.
I have, and
Yeah,
I'm telling you that this is true. I
let's
mean,
answer
you can
that.
disagree with it,
No,
but so then what is
inflation.
when we have record
No,
profits?
let me finish. I will explain. You're lying to people.
I get to be the moderator. Let me ask the question.
You're lying to people by saying that.
So we have a boost of profits in society. Profits have increased by 183% in the top 5 industries in Canada, and that has inflationary impacts.
No. Let me explain why. No, I will explain why. What is the definition of inflation? General inflation. It's when all the goods and services, the price of all that is increasing. How do we calculate inflation? We have a basket of goods and services, and in that basket, when the basket is going up, you have general inflation. But you have general inflation because of money creation.
No.
Because, stay with me, if you have $1 million in circulation in Canada, only $1 million in circulation. If the price of a good, like food, is going up, the price of other good will have to go down. You won't have general inflation. Inflation, it's always because of a bad monetary policy, because of creation of money out of thin air. When you create money out of thin air, you create inflation, and that's why we have inflation right now. And do you know why? The Bank of Canada has an inflation target of 2%. Why the Bank of Canada has an inflation target of 2%? Because they want inflation, and they know that they create inflation by printing money out of thin air. So inflation, it's always because of a bad monetary policy. It's not, so a price of a good can go up, the the price of the gas can go up, but if you have the same amount of money in circulation in the economy, the price of another good would go down, and you won't have general
When you
inflation.
have Suncor making 183% more in profits every year, that is an inflationary pressure that increases people's price of fuel. That is unquestionably true.
So you're against profit. You're against profit.
Me personally, I'm against profit. But
Okay,
this is
so you're against the poor people. By saying that, you're against the poor people.
Stop, Jesus Christ. I will ask a question about profit then for everybody then. What is the role of profit in society? And we'll go one at a time, and we'll try not to interrupt each other, okay? And you can sum it up at the end. So Alexa, what do you see profit in the role of society today?
So I actually, I struggle with a just society that has been built on unjust historic. So historically, my ancestors were in places where they were able to buy land, and others, indigenous blacks, were not. And so my family has had hereditary wealth. So I want to equate this to profits, because we've been able to accumulate, we've been able to build, we've been able to have tremendous wealth at the expense of other individuals, newcomers. The role of profits, in my mind, in a just society, needs to be for the common good of all. And it cannot be for the 0.1% of Canadians that hold 12% of our collective wealth. Think about that. 0.1% of us have 12% of our wealth, and that wealth is staying with them. It's not going into, this is the wealth that they've accumulated. It's not going into housing, into food security, into supporting those who are most in need. So for me, the role of profits has always been about creating a better society. And I don't believe that individuals do that best on their own. We do that collectively. We put the money in a pot, we all get the benefit of roads. We put the money in a pot, we all get the benefits of hospitals, of schools. And when we don't, we have an unjust society where some people can pay for doctors. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time in the States, and I've seen that terrible inequality, where maternal health rates are the same as some of the developing countries, because there's tremendous inequality. The purpose of food should not be to make a profit, by the way. The purpose of food should be to feed people. And when the grocery stores in Canada are making record profits, and 10% of us are going to use food banks, and 1 in 4 is food insecure, then we have a problem with the current system, and we need to rethink how we redistribute so that each and every human being and creation can thrive together in this country.
I think by any measure, and so I think it's important to establish some facts, right? By any measure, this is a rich country, and one only has to travel around the world to see that, right? When you look at the level of infrastructure, when you look at the buildings we're in right here, when you look at, for example, you're not wrong. No, I'm saying it for a reason. If you look at, for example, the educational institutions that exist in society, you know, I work at Carleton University. The level of the kind of assets that institution has in comparison to the assets of, for example, the University of West Indies, where my family comes from. There's no comparison, right? So by any measure, this is a very rich society. And unfortunately, not everyone in society benefits from the bounty that is produced in this society. And so what I would suggest is that in order, if we want to live in a just society, we should be enabling, or rather we should have a system to allow each individual, because I know you're interested in individuals, each individual being able to realize their full human potential. Right? And so the question is, what are the basic needs of individuals? What do human beings need? Well, they need, but they also need food. People need healthcare. Right? People need clean air. Right?
Okay, it's playing now.
They need
very basic
audio,
things. I can't hear the audio.
They need drinking water, right? there are a lot of people, there are a lot of young people
audio,
who live in
put it on.
spaces in the society where they don't have access to proper drinking water. They don't have access to proper access to health care or basic health care. So my basic point is that everyone should be able to benefit from the bounty of the society. Should be profiting from the society.
Hearing what others have to say, we can actually really sort of critique each other's ideas in ways that allow each other to improve our ideas and ultimately put out a product that is stronger than what we would have each made on our own because we were each able to contribute perspectives that the others didn't have or did not think of. And so ultimately, when it comes to discourse, this is the way forward. No matter what topic we're talking about, when it comes to politics, approaching a discussion, a controversial discussion in good faith, actually discussing it with the intention of improving our own ideas through hearing criticisms and improving other people's ideas through delivering solid criticisms.
Freedom of speech. You're an advocate of freedom of speech.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. No hate speech. Everyone gets to speak their mind. Is that what you're saying?
That's the way forward.
No call that violence. You speak your mind.
Introduce Senator.
We're going to finish answering this question with Mr. Bernier, and then we'll go to advocate.
Okay.
Okay, let's start by profit. Is it good? Is it bad? A corporation must have profit or not? Yes. When a corporation is making profit or a mom and dad shop is making profit, it's because they are giving you a service and you want to buy that. You want to buy that goods. Nobody obliges you to buy that. So if a corporation is doing a lot of profit, it's because they're servicing a lot of people and people wants to buy their goods. So what we must do, if you have a profit and a corporation is making profit, that's good because they can reinvest that and that's the start of the economic growth. Without any economic growth, you won't have prosperity and you won't be able to help the poor. So profit is important, it is good in a society. If you don't like profit and big corporation, okay, you're going to say we're going to tax the big corporation. We're going to tax their income, their profit. And you think that the corporation will pay the tax? No. A corporation is a fiction. A corporation never pays taxes. Never pays taxes. Why? Because when you impose a tax to a corporation, that's a cost for that corporation. And that corporation will transfer that cost to who? To you, the consumers, or they will transfer that cost to their employees. They won't be able to have a raise for a salary, or they will transfer that cost to the owner. He won't have a good income, a return on it, or return on its investment. So depending on the competition, the corporation will transfer the cost on employees, consumers, or the owner, or one of them, or all of them. So a corporation is a fiction. When you tax a corporation, at the end, you are taxing people. You are taxing people. So, is it good to have a tax on corporation? Yes, but the best tax on corporation, not to tax people, will be a flat tax on corporation. Because if you're making a lot of profit, 10% of $1 million is more than 10% of $100. So let's have a flat tax on corporation and no subsidies to corporation. If they're not good and they cannot make profit, they must go bankrupt because people doesn't want to buy their goods. So now your money and your government is giving billions of dollars to the green industry, billions of dollars to the auto
when
industry
there's nothing
for
going
green
on
cars,
stage, have some
and
music.
you won't be
Yeah.
able to
But we'll
buy a
figure it
green
out.
cars because it's too expensive. So they're giving that to the rich people again. Let's stop corporate welfare, and we can save about $10 billion a year. Imagine how many hospitals we can build with $10 billion a year. So yes, I'm for profit, yes, I'm for free markets, and I'm against government subsidies because it's always bad for us, for the people.
So you agree with taxes?
I agree with the flat tax, and I agree that the best tax,
No, the question is-
the best, you asked me a question, I
No,
will
the question
answer.
is why?
Let
Why
me
taxes?
answer. Yes, answer? The best tax is the consumption tax, because you, as a consumer, you decide if you want to pay taxes or not. You don't spend your money to consume something. That's great. You're going to have more money to save. And when you have saving, that's the basic of the economic growth. More saving, more investment, more growth. So it's always like that. Money is not coming, falling from the sky. Personally, you don't have your salary, you have to work. First of all, you produce something, you work, and after that you have your salary. So yes, the best tax must be a consumption tax, and if you have an income tax, it must be a flat tax for everybody.
The question is why? Why taxes? What are taxes for?
Because we need taxes, because we need the government to give us the basic services. And what are these basic services? Security, the most important, and also being sure that we have in our Constitution, we must respect our Constitution. In our Constitution, we have a clause that is saying we must help poor provinces with the equalization formula. So the government will need money for that, yes, because some provinces are poorer than the other one, and if you want to have a just society, the government must be able to give the same services in PEI than what you have in Toronto. So that's why you have that equalization formula. So we need a government, but we need a small government, and the government must not interfere in provincial and municipal jurisdictions like healthcare, like housing. That's provincial jurisdiction. So I want my federal government to respect people and respect the Constitution.
I suspect we're going to get into some contradictions pretty quickly with the freedoms of a person in Newfoundland and the freedoms of a person in Alberta. But we're going to pass it to Madam Pate to introduce herself and to maybe talk a little bit about how you imagine a just society in Canada.
Thank you very much, and I want to apologize for being late. I got in at 2:30 this morning on my flight and somehow mucked up my schedule, so I very much apologize for missing. So before being in the Senate, I spent about more than 40 years going in, but most importantly being able to go out of prisons for young people, men and women. And our prisons are full of the people who every other system fails. And so when I think the timing of this is good, because part of the reason that I was interested when I was approached by the folks who wanted to put my name forward for the Senate was because of our role to address the issues that elected officials often do not, usually because you can't see progress on those issues within one electoral cycle. So for me, it really was about going to the Senate to work on issues around how do we breathe life into our charter and how do we truly create just, fair, equal supports, health, social, and economic supports for those who don't and aren't able to have them. And just to pick up, I'm sorry I missed the earlier parts of this conversation, but just to pick up on what was being discussed, one of the things we know is if you go to Scandinavian countries, they're the most just, fair, and equal, and they also have access to services, but they don't have the excesses that we see in countries like ours and south of the border. And instead, you see people taken care of. You see economic, social, and health security, as well as education security, free post-secondary education, so that people can work to their full potential. That's the kind of just, fair, and equal society that personally I would like to see. And when we talk about people having to work, what about the people who can't? There are many people who can't. And what about the unlivable wages? The fact that in this country, in 90% of the communities in this country, someone working full-time at a minimum wage job cannot afford to rent a one-bedroom apartment. That is what we need to be remedying. So we need to be looking at how do we resource those areas. And as one of my colleagues said, who considers himself, I think, a fiscal conservative, said, if we dealt with things like the offshore tax evasion, we've got people's names in the Panama and Pandora Papers that have never been prosecuted, who, if we collected the taxes that are currently owed, that are taken offshore that don't ever get invested in our economy, we could actually be funding many of the services and programs and things like a guaranteed livable income, where I just was in PEI a couple of weeks ago. They want to roll it out. They want to show. And I think much like Medicare, when Saskatchewan decided to take it on, once they started, everyone saw how it benefited. And we have lots of work to do, as we know, to repair that system, to bolster it. And one of the ways I think we increase trust in the government is by being trustworthy and showing that we can actually, we will invest in people, not just in corporations. So I think we have to do that kind of investment as well.
Thank you. Now I know Bill's really itching for the audience questions because he shines in that moment. I'm going to ask one more question to the panel before we go to the audience. And the question of security has come up a lot. And the idea that we need to fund taxes to pay for security in society. Now, security is a funny thing because security for one person is very different than security for another person. I was in Edmonton last week and I watched police clear out an encampment while 2 people needed emergency medical care. And the question was, who is kept secure in this situation? It's not those people that need medical care, it's the sidewalk and the purpose of the sidewalk. And so how do you define security, and what does security look like in a just society? And we'll go down one at a time.
I think that historically we've seen when everyone has their needs met, we are a more secure system. And security for me is about making sure that each and every individual can thrive. And when we have the choice between buying a few fighter jets for $73 billion or lifting every Canadian that is now in poverty, which is about 9%, out of poverty for roughly the same amount, I think that we would find that the social ills that we see in our society would shift. We've seen when people have, to your point about guaranteed livable income, when people have guaranteed livable income, when people are cared for in their early years, we see a decrease in costs to our entire system in crime prevention, in healthcare prevention, and that those costs that are spent early on can actually create a system that is more just and more secure. Part of what we do when we build up arsenals is about a belief of a scarcity mentality, that there is not enough for us and for them. And so we need to protect ours, and we need to spend money to protect ours. But as Adrian was pointing out, this is an abundance in this country. We have more than enough. And if we redistribute it, if we spend it wisely, then there isn't that need to protect and to live with scarcity mentality is a myth in a country as abundant as ours.
Okay. Of course, I apologize, right? Yeah, everything I'm recording.
There is personal security.
Yeah, I can take it. Like if you can say like whatever TR did.
Okay.
There's only personal security. There's also health security. That we can get the kind of health care that we need when we're suffering from a particular ailment. There's food security, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of food insecurity in the country. So all of us have those basic needs. We need to be able to provide, ourselves with the sustenance so that we can just endure from day to day, right? There is economic security as well, right? In order to function in the society, people need a certain amount of money. But we can also say that there is a security for a country. Countries need a certain kind of security as well. Countries can be invaded, they can be menaced, right? So they are entitled to have a certain amount of that kind of military security that will enable them to protect themselves from those people who would want to harm them in some way. So I think we have to have many different conceptions of what security is.
All right. So first of all, I just want to say I didn't expect the conversation to go this way. So I don't really have much to say, but I guess I will find something that you should regret about
food, that's for Expo. Okay, sorry.
Bookmark, Adrian. And stickers.
Coordinator of the Ottawa International Food and Book Expo.
We could actually speak up ourselves. And this ultimately gets back to when
This video footage. You can wave to it. Thank you for your work.
There's no real good choice. You say they probably ain't compromised in that case. And I can see the merit case for saying that. And I don't entirely know where the balance is. But what I will say is that when it comes to people experiencing homelessness, people on the street, so much of the fear that people feel within themselves when it comes to feeling like they're not secure when they're walking in the street, and there's a lot of people on the street. A lot of that is just in people's heads. A lot of that is not actually based in any sort of danger that is to them. Like, I used to volunteer for a soup kitchen that pretty much almost the entire clientele there were homeless. And when I was serving them food, just kind of having light conversations and sometimes even heavy conversations about their housing situations and how they got there. Ultimately, some of the biggest lessons that I learned were first of all, that really kind of frustrated, pissed off, that look that a lot of them have when you see them walking the streets. A lot of that just really comes from the tiredness and frustration they feel from not having their needs met, from living desperately, living in a situation where they don't have enough money to pay for what they need, and they're shackled to an addiction that they want to get rid of but has a mind of its own. And a lot of these people are there just because of money, just because the rent was too much. Like, did you know Statistics Canada released a report earlier this year, and overall among Canadians, when it comes to the reasons why people became homeless, insufficient income for housing was actually the most commonly provided answer at 28%. This is actually a mile ahead of the second most commonly cited reason, which was substance abuse at 18%, and this was a survey where people could give multiple answers to the question. But yeah, ultimately, we do need to be safe. We do need to be safe, but we shouldn't have this sort of like negative perception of people who themselves are unsafe in the process.
I'll be short of that one. So security is the security of the person. Every Canadian must be able to walk in downtown Toronto or Montreal or Calgary at night, at midnight or 1 o'clock at night, and being secure, being able to do what they want to do. We don't have that in our country right now because we are soft on crime. We need to be tough on crime and send a strong message. If you want to do something, you'll go to jail. So we need to improve that. Security, you said security of healthcare. Yes, you spoke about the Scandinavian countries. Actually, they have private hospital over there. Oh, some people here don't like the private sector, but they have private hospital in Sweden, and they're more efficient. But you know what? Everybody has the same universal insurance, but they can choose to go to the private hospital or to the public hospital. Freedom of choice, better service, but we don't have that in this country. The way to solve our healthcare challenge is to have more competition. Everybody must be able, with their universal insurance, to choose if they want to go to a private or public clinics. We don't have that. We need to have more competition like in the Scandinavian countries. Security of housing. The problem is mass immigration. It is in our face. We have too many people that are coming to that country, and we open our borders to immigrants without actually doing an interview with them, and we don't know who's coming to our country. We need to stop mass immigration, and that will solve the housing problems. It's a question of demand and offer, So you need to, but traditional establishment politicians don't want to speak about that because, they're going to be seen as racist and xenophobe, but no, I like this country and that's why we must stop mass immigration. That's having an impact on our standard of living. You know, the economy is growing, but we have so many people that are coming that the GDP per capita is going down. We are poor. We have more people and we individually are poor. We need to stop that. But also our culture is in danger. You know what is happening in Quebec right now? The independentist movement is going up and they're going to win the next election, the PQ. Why? Because Quebecers want to keep their culture. And now with mass immigration and multiculturalism, they are losing that. And it's the same thing in English Canada also. You have ghetto in some region, in Halifax, in Surrey, that, you know, you go in that city and you want to read the advice on the wall of shops, and it's all in Hindu or it's all in Chinese. There's no English there. So you need to fight for our culture, and if you want to come to this country, you know, it's a big decision for an immigrant to change and come to a new country. We need to be able to integrate them, and they need to participate in the society. Now they cannot. They're coming here, they're on the street, yes, like you said, in the tents in Toronto. We are not taking care of them, and when we are taking care of them, they are in a big hotel in downtown Toronto, and we are paying for that. So less immigrants, stop open borders, stop mass immigration, helping them, having people that will come here and they will be able to have a job and to help their families. Now they don't have a job. So if you want a fair and just society, it must start by ending mass immigration now.
Well, then you'd also have to stop using the goods that come from those countries where we're depleting. Yes, you would be, because if you're actually proposing those kinds of measures, then you're ignoring everything from the environmental, the climate racism, the...
There's no link between that. I'm just saying...
Yes, there is. And if being tough on crime made communities safe, then the United States would be the safest place in the world to live. We know that's not true. And so we know what creates more safety. It is security. And in all the ways that were already described by the others on the panel, I don't need to repeat those, but the reality is the more we create inequality, the more we create insecurity, and that increases the risk to all, because people are desperate. And when you talk about people who are homeless, if you talk to people who are homeless, and I'm glad you did in the soup kitchen, when I go down and talk to folks who are living on the streets, all they can think about is whether they'll have enough to to eat today. When I was up in the Yukon in January, I met a woman who had been living in her car. She was a teacher. She left an abusive relationship and then found out that all of the money was in her former partner's name. And she was every day, and I had just been talking about Dr. Zhao's scarcity mindset research, which shows that if you're living in poverty, if you don't know when you'll get your next meal, if you don't know whether you'll freeze to death tonight, that's all you can think about. And so after I talked about this, she came up afterwards and said, I didn't want to say this publicly because people know me. It's a small community. She said, but when this happened, all I could think every day was, will I have enough money to buy the gas so I don't freeze to death tonight? Then my next question was, will I have any money left over after I buy the gas to actually get some food? And one of her friends happened to notice that something was awry. And so she said, I don't know what's going on, but it looks like you're living in your car. Come stay at my place. Gave her a spare room. And she said within a week, she was able to start applying for a job. Within a month, she was employed. And she said she would never have believed what I was talking about if she hadn't experienced it. And then Dr. Zhao, who's been doing the cash transfers in Vancouver, also did an experiment. Well, she didn't think it was an experiment, but other researchers did. And some of you may have heard about, she gave $7,500 to 50 people who were homeless. No strings attached. A whole bunch of folks said, oh, they'll just waste it on drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, whatever. But what she found was within 3 months, all of those people were housed, and within 12 months, most of them were working. The other thing she found, and it's one of the few areas where people have done this research, is that the use of drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes went down right across the board, including for people who had addictions. She's now doing a second replication of this, $8,500 to 200 people. And a number of businesses have invested because they recognize that if people are more secure, if they have housing, if they have food security, if they have the ability to think beyond the immediacy of what they're dealing with, then they start contributing to the community. And so why wouldn't we want those resources going to people who are here and supporting them, because we know those resources then get invested in the community, in the economy, the local economy, not in offshore tax evasion. And so I think we really have to think about what security means in a collective fashion, not just an individualistic fashion, because that's what we are. We're a collective trying to move together through the world. And if you're not, then why would you not care about the people who are struggling? The only people who stay home more when they have access to a steady income, like a guaranteed livable income, are two groups. People who are caring for other people, and people who are trying to upscale their employment opportunities, either going to school, studying, that kind of thing, to try and get a better job. And then there are a few who are so significantly impaired in terms of mental health or sometimes addictions, usually related to dealing with mental health issues. And why wouldn't we want those people cared for? Why would we relegate those people to not being deserving of the same human and supportive environment? So security to me means not just an individual, but a collective, and looking at, with open, not rose-colored glasses, about the misogyny, the racism, the class inequality, and the inequality of people's opportunities. Those are real, and if we don't address them, we don't look seriously at how we assist all of us. Because if we don't start looking at success as other than GDP, why aren't we looking at success as human well-being, as collective well-being, as climate, as environmental well-being? Because we know, on my way over here, I was hearing about the forest fires again. We know that more equal approaches also involve more equitable and respectful treatment of our land as well. So those are all areas that I think we have to combine and look at.
I think the challenge that we've been facing this morning is that and I think Alexa alluded to this earlier, the challenge we've been facing is we've been having two different conversations. You know, and my sense is that, Mr. Bernier, you're talking more about how services are distributed, right? You believe that it's really the private sphere that should be responsible for distributing services in society, right? That's your view. You don't have as much faith in the idea of the public, which is fair. That's your viewpoint. But I think that really, fundamentally, the conversation that we should be having here is what are the basic needs of human beings, right? And what's required to produce a society of justice, right? What does that actually look like? So, for example, the fact that Indigenous people represent 5% of the population of this country, right? Just 5%. And yet, 30% of federal inmates, right, are Indigenous, right? And 42% of female inmates at the federal level are Indigenous as well. It's now 50%.
It's now 50%.
That's a problem, right? How is that possible in society, right, that Indigenous people comprise so much of that imprisoned population? That's the kind of conversation I think we need to talk about. So again, the question is that just? Can it be just that 5% of the Indigenous population represents 30%? And what do we need in order to get to a more just society?
Yeah, First Nation, it's a good point, and the problem is again the government. You know, we have an Indian Act, that's a racist act. So we need to abolish that. I'm the only politician who's saying that. And actually, we need to give more responsibility to the First Nation, and that's what they want. Now you have the federal government. If you want to build something on the First Nation land, you need to have the approval of a civil servant downtown here, in Ottawa. So they must be able to do that. Actually, we have a lot of success story with First Nation in BC and in Quebec. They are independent. They are able to have businesses, and now you don't have any property rights on reserve. So they cannot buy a house, but they cannot also have a mortgage on that house. That's the basic if you want to have more economic growth. So we need to have a kind of a property right on reserve. So yes, we need to do a lot of changes, but there's First Nations who are very successful, and we must look at them, and the federal government must be out of the way. Now the federal government is giving billions of dollars, and we still don't have clean water on reserve. That problem is the government, again.
We'd like to include all of you who have been here for the past hour, listening and observing, and we remind you, if you have some questions, passion is very cool, but also respect as well with each other. What's your name? What's your question?
Alan? Mr. Bernier, I apologize for this, but I think I'm going to embarrass you with this question. I like your policies, okay, I like your platform, except for one, okay? The one policy that I think you're wrong on, and I have an economic background, so you say that you want to go on the gold standard if the People's Party becomes the government. The reason why all the governments around the world went off the gold standard is that every year the population increases. I think we can all agree on that. And every year the business increases. The needs for money for investing increases. Now, if those two are always increasing every year and you stay on the gold standard, you're limiting your money supply. Okay, and all you're doing is increasing the interest rates because the investors are going to have to compete for that limited amount of money that they need to invest. And therefore, if they're competing for that, the interest rates are going to go up unnecessarily because there's not enough money to go around. So by going on a gold standard, you're just tying your hands behind your back, and you're going to end up in a permanent recession. And I predict that if you do become in power and you do go on the gold standard, 6 months to a year later, you'll go off it very soon. You'll find out why.
Thank you for asking. It is not the policy of the People's Party of Canada to have a gold standard. But yes, I said that the best system will be a system when you have a gold standard. Why? We had a gold standard in the 18th century, and it was very, very prosperous era at that time. And you know, prices were going down because they were not able, government were not able to create money out of thin air, and we didn't have inflation in the 18th century. So yes, the gold standard must be the best system, but as a country, you cannot implement that yourself. You need to have international negotiation for that. And by the way, it may happen with the BRICS countries in Africa and Asia. They are looking for another monetary unit, currency that will compete against the American dollars, and they want to fix that currency on what? On gold. And that's why actually we need to speak with the Bank of Canada, and now the best thing that we have in our platform is to have a zero inflation target with the Bank of Canada. We want to say to the Bank of Canada, stop creating money out of thin air. Inflation is bad. 2% inflation is bad. 20% inflation is bad. If you have a 0% inflation, everybody will be richer, including the poor, and everybody will be able to buy more goods and more services. Now the federal government is not taxing you more, but the federal government is telling you, I won't take your own money in your own pocket right now, but you know, you will have inflation and you won't be able to buy the same amount of goods and services with that money. Our standard of living is going down, our purchasing power is going down, and all because of that money creation. So let's have a big reform, say no to the Bank of Canada with the 2% inflation target, 0% inflation target, and we disagree on the gold standard, but it's not part of to do that in Canada because we cannot implement that alone as a country.
Let's stay on topic. Great question. Your name and what's your question? Who's support?
Yes, hello. My name is Max Thompson. I guess it's a general question for all the panels because we did hear some very loud people speaking. However, I want to give everyone, well, it's not just you, but it's everyone else. I want to give everyone an opportunity to answer this. I guess I've been here since the beginning of this panel and I watched it all, and I think that it's a sad thing to hear that people are using mass immigration as a scapegoat, considering 99% of people here are either children of immigrants or immigrants themselves, and that you choose to call ourselves Canadian. However, that's not the purpose of my question. The fact is that we spent about, I believe, an hour talking about all sorts of tangents, but Indigenous people have only been brought up in the last 5 minutes, and it's a really sad reality. Canada's largest failure is the failure of integrating our Indigenous people, because this is originally their land. So my question is to reinforce the position that all of you may have in terms of what is a just society, given that Indigenous people have a very special but underrepresented section in our society. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important question. Because, yes, most of us in this room are immigrants to this country. We have one Indigenous peoples. My peoples were Indigenous to Scotland and Ireland. And when I came here, my ancestors enacted the Indian Act and reaped the benefits of a very unjust system. And there has to be conversations about reparation, not just giving, as we heard, responsibility and allowing for self-governance, but actually then owning what does it mean to do reparations for lost damages for the past. What do we need to do to have true reconciliation? And that would be a more just Canadian society. And for that to happen, quite frankly, we have to have a panel with a much more diverse background than us up here, right? We have to have a panel next time with people with lived experience, with Indigenous folks that are speaking on their own Indigenous rights. And we have to be able to create a system where we hear one another. I thought deeply appreciated that, Ryan, where we come open-hearted, ready to be transformed, not just transform the other. That is the kind of way in which we will create a just society when we truly listen to the needs of each and every human and recognize that each and every one of them has a gift, right? Those that are coming now are some of the biggest gifts to our country. The other thing I would say about immigration is we don't want to conflate new immigrants with refugees who we've signed on to the UN Declaration of Refugee Rights, and those that were arriving in our streets in Toronto were fleeing terrors of another country. And I spent... Coming from the US. No, sir. I spent the year on the streets at 129 Peter, which is the central intake for Toronto, and the immigrants, the refugees that are sleeping out there are from mostly African countries, from places where who they love might get them killed, from places where their children are being kidnapped. No, I'm not finished yet, but if you see, this is part of the challenge that I have. You are deeply listening. Not at all. You are listening to be able to speak your point. If you were deeply listening, you would have a posture of just listening and seeing if what I'm saying might transform what you're saying. We can't have a just society until we are ready to deeply listen first.
Some new refugees in your
I did. Remember, refugees were sleeping in my basement because
increase it and bring some more in your home. Not in my community, in the Byward Market where I live. We'll put them in your home, and we'll increase your home and bring more.
What kind of system do you want to live in? If you are fleeing for your life, do you want someone to open up their home to you? That is the kind of question we have right now. What kind of country do we want to have? And the kind of country that I want to have is one where I am profoundly changed by the people I meet. And I profoundly see the human person in front of me with all of their rights and all of their needs And then I believe that in doing so, we become better. We become so much more than we ever imagined we could be. That is the country that I think we can build.
You know, Indigenous peoples are part of nations with very, very long histories, with languages, with traditions that need to be respected. I don't know if Indigenous peoples necessarily want to be integrated. Right? I think they have their own cultures, they have their own ways of being, and I think that my sense is that Indigenous peoples want to be self-determining. Right? Indigenous peoples want to be able to exercise control over their territories. They want to benefit from the riches of their territories, and they want respect, right, from the Canadian state, right? And they want treaties to be respected, right? They want, for example, the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right, which Murray Sinclair was presided over. They want those carried out, and not all of them have been carried out. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so thank you for that question about, if I understand correctly, it was about how approaches to creating a just society, specifically in the context of Indigenous peoples in Canada, the uniqueness of these communities and their need to be respected as such, as unique in this country. One of my favorite topics and concepts in Canadian politics is intergovernmental relations. Currently, in the federal government's current approach to intergovernmental relations dominantly focuses on liaising with provinces and territories. They dominantly focus on municipalities as basically just extensions of the provinces and territories, even though they really do have an impact on their own. And when it comes to Indigenous governments, well, they are increasingly getting focused on over the years, but not as much as they could be. Now, we have decades of experience in Canada figuring out how to cut through the shackles of the jurisdictions that the Constitution has given us when it comes to federal and provincial jurisdiction. If the province wants to do something that the federal government has to sign off on, or if the federal government wants to implement a social program that has to be delivered by the provinces through, as a result of the layout of the federal system that the Constitution has laid out, we have decades of experience like actually figuring out how to liaise with the provinces, how to have tough conversations with them, and ultimately create a system that we both agree on in order to work as a unit and move a program forward together. This is how we get stuff like $10 a day childcare and pretty much our entire public health care system. Remember, mostly funded by the feds, mostly carried out by the provinces, but also some private sector involvement, as you said. I think that one of the best ways to respect the uniqueness and the degree of sovereignty that is possessed by Indigenous governments is to treat them in a similar sort of way. Treat them as governments in their own right. And when the federal government has actually done a good job of actually creating deals with them, there have been good results. This is what has ultimately yielded what Mr. Bernier has said about, in many ways, creating a system where on reserve a lot of money can be generated, and on traditional lands a lot of money can be generated. One of the examples that I'm at least somewhat familiar with is the revenue sharing agreement with one of the First Nations in New Brunswick. They get a lot of the revenue from the gas that's there, and they're doing better than they were before as a result. And so ultimately, intergovernmental affairs, intergovernmental relations, that whole system does not just have to be seen as federal, provincial, territorial relations. There are other governments in Canada, Indigenous governments, that have a purpose here on their own that our governments
governments in their own rights, that have a history that predates Canada, and liaising with them as governments in their own rights can actually allow the federal government and those Indigenous governments to actually move together with an agreement as a unit in a direction that they both agree that they want.
So we all agree here on one thing, that we must abolish the Indian Act because it's a racist act. So that's the beginning of the solution. Do I have all the solutions? No. First, nations know better than myself or a bureaucrat in Ottawa what is good for them. Give them more autonomy, abolish the Indian Acts and they will do what is good for them. So we must look at them like Canadians. Now they are not Canadians, they are not part of our society, they are not fully part of our society. They need to be part of our society. We are putting them in a gate over there on reserve. We must be able to have a relationship with them that will be based on respect, and the first thing to do is to abolish that racist act that we have in Canada, the Indian Act.
Many Indigenous peoples don't want to be Canadian. They're not Canadian.
No.
They're their own nations.
They are part of this country, and you ask them the questions. I travel across the country, I've met a lot of them, and they want to be treated as Canadians, and yes, they have another culture. I respect that. We have another culture in Quebec, you have another culture downtown Toronto. The culture in Manitoba is different than the one in here, Ottawa. We need to respect their culture, I agree with that, but they are part of this country and they want to be part of this country.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe.
So thank you very much for asking that question and for raising it. And I'm glad you raised it because I didn't realize that Adrian's comments were the first where it came up. I, in fact, was just meeting yesterday with some First Nations leaders in Winnipeg. That's what I was doing. And one of the things we're talking about is some of these same issues. And I want to be clear, when people say, when most Indigenous peoples, and they're not a big blob, there are in First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, but most First Nations folks, when they talk about getting rid of the Indian Act, don't just see it as abolishing the act. It means the resources that were stripped from communities, from nations, also needs to be repaired. And as was already mentioned, we have roadmaps. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls calls for justice. Lay out exactly how we could move forward. And it's not accidental that the very same issues that give rise to Indigenous women being disappeared, murdered, rendered homeless are the same issues that result in them being 50% of the federal prison population. And where I was in Manitoba, 90% of the provincial jail population. And then if you look at youth, 100%. In the Manitoba Youth Center, every kid there, the last time I went, was Indigenous. That's what we have to remedy, and it's not accidental. And I suspect that when most of us go out and talk about things like our public safety, we're not afraid of masses of poor, racialized, particularly Indigenous women and girls who are suffering the past trauma of abuse, who have never been supported, who may have been encouraged or found substances to anesthetize themselves to those realities, who haven't been protected when they've called police or other state authorities, who when they act to protect themselves or other people, the full weight of the law comes down to criminalize and imprison them. I suspect that's not who we're thinking of. And so we need to also think about the policies we put in place. And if we wouldn't put a policy in place that would do something to someone we love, why would we do it to anybody? And that's the kind of approach that I think we have to be taking and following, yes, I agree with engaging with folks where there are, and it's an iterative process of we learn and grow together, but it's an excuse to say we don't already have a roadmap. It's already been laid out for us by the TRC and the MMIWG, what we need to do next. And so I think we need to do it. action is required at this point, and it's why Claudette and so many of people are saying we want reconciliation. We don't want more talk. We want to see the movement happen, and I think that's what we need to do. And that includes reparation, but it also includes the types of approaches that have been recommended, including some of the environmental racism issues that they're raising.
Thank you, Senator. We have about 30 minutes left. I think one more question, and then the final words with our panel. You know, I didn't know what was going to be happening today. I thought I was here to talk about interviewing rock stars for a living. I'm getting way more out of this discussion. It's pretty good. One question, and then the final words. Okay. Senator, what is your name?
My name?
Yeah. Kim Page.
Yeah. Hi, Kim Page. So my question for you is, could I have today, so during the COVID time, what I would call the pandemic, about 5 million Canadians did not get the shots. So during that time in 2020, I just graduated from University of Ottawa with my bachelor's degree. So after graduating, I was barred from doing graduate studies at any college or university campus in province Ontario. As time went on, I was barred from going on the VRL. As time went on, I was barred from being in a coffee shop. So when it was like minus 30 with the wind chill, I was at a Bridge Cafe in Hinterberg, that's like an area here in Ottawa. I was supposed to go outside. So my question to you today is, and I would like to videotape your answer, can you give me a guarantee today that there will be no other new scamdemics, no new any versions of lockdowns, whether it be climate reason, environmental reason, a new flu virus? Can I have an assurance today that 5 million Canadians and I will not be phased out of society again like we're second-class citizens, that I will not be worrying about paying my condo fees and my property taxes for my home? Because that was my situation when I finished my degree, I cannot do my graduate studies, and every time I go to an interview in a job in my field in administration, after the interview I'm asked for my flu shot information. I was also offered a job. There is a building, a government building at King Edward right across the street from my condo where I live, where I own a home. I was not able to go through past that interview because during that time the scandemic was still going on, and I cannot work in that office as a part-time administrator because the flu shot mandate is still there. So please, I would really love it if I can get a guarantee that no more medical tyranny, no more arbitrary rules, no more phasing out 5 million Canadians, putting us in a position where we cannot pay our bills, pay our property taxes, pay our condo fees, pay our groceries. Can I get that from you? Please and thank you.
You're going to love the panel tomorrow, by the way.
So, the reality is that the need for some of the measures that happened during the pandemic were in part because we haven't shored up our health, social, and economic system so that everybody's needs were met. And I hope we don't have.
So you agree with the lockdown? You're okay with that?
I agree with the need to take collective measures when individual actions could interfere with the overall health of many people.
That's totalitarianism, that's socialism. People must be free. That virus was not dangerous.
Maxim,
we
if you
have all
can,
the data right now. It's a shame on you for that position.
You'll have your chance. The question is to Senator Pate, but you can answer when she's finished.
So the reality is that we need to have collective interests taken care of. That's why I said it's not just about individual security. It's not about just individual. If individual actions affect the collective, then we should be taking care of things in a collective manner. And if in fact we had the supports in place that many of us are advocating, we wouldn't have to take the same health measures. So
are you justifying the medical tyranny? Yes or no? This is just for my argument. You justify phasing out. Was it right that DeLon does not get to do his graduate studies? DeLon does not get to win the funeral.
You know what? There were a whole bunch of us who were extremely.
If you could stop, like we're asking questions to a panel, and I ask you to be respectful. And Senator Pate is one of many, many senators and many parliamentarians.
Yes.
And if you've asked the questions very clear, she's got the right to answer. Then everyone else will answer when you're finished. But you've asked the question, so let her answer.
So the reality is, we have for years had vaccinations so you could go to school, so that kids could all be in school together. We have and you know, the vaccines were developed in record time. There may be challenges. I'm not, and for sure, as the pandemic was unfolding, new information was coming in every day, and we were expecting people to respond to that. Do I think that we should do things to prevent us from getting there again? Absolutely. But if it happens again, why wouldn't we take action to protect people?
So you are showing your communism. You want to do another lockdown again.
I don't want to
say
see
it,
the
hon.
lockdown.
Say it for the camera. Be proud. Be
I
like, I'm
don't
gonna do
want
another
to.
lockdown. Big up your chest. Say it, hon. Tell Delon that I'm going to another country.
We don't mean-
Do a lockdown. Say it.
Listen, man, she's not your hun, all right? She's not your hun. That's disrespectful. That's disrespectful, man.
I'm trying to make
Excuse me,
you
sir.
honest, be like, I'm
Sir,
gonna
I want you to address her with respect. She's not your hun.
So
Can you
the
please say
reality
it?
is, I don't, you've heard what I work at,
Yes,
as
no.
if I would be supporting people being confined. However,
I was in jail because of that. Is it okay that I was in jail and I was not able? You agree with that? That they put me in jail for my freedom of speech. Do you
calm
agree
down,
with
everyone.
that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're gonna relax here. I mean, I've been beaten by police. Like, there's lots of injustices in the world. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we're not here to gang up. We're here to have a respectful, passionate discussion.
So we're gonna, no more, please do not rebut. When Senator Pate is finished, then anyone else that wants to respond to this question can respond.
So do I hope that we're not in that situation again? Absolutely, and it's why I'm advocating things like economic, social, and health security, because it's less likely we'll be in that situation. Part of the reason we ended up in a crisis is because we have let those resources down, and because people were in vastly unequal situations. So, do I support vaccinations? Absolutely. Do I support people's rights to not be vaccinated if they don't want to? Yes, but that means you make a decision individually that affects what you can do collectively. And I think that's the importance that people have to understand, that the misinformation, the disinformation that is out there is, I find that's part of what we need to address, because if you're not treating everybody the way you would treat someone you care about, then I think you need to think about why is that.
Okay, so no, there's no follow-up questions. We will see. Would you like anyone else?
All right, so thank you for your question. Here's the thing. I think you're asking the wrong question. People don't know. People don't know. You're asking a senator, you're asking somebody in Parliament who gets information largely from the news, largely from staffers, about what's going to happen next. And no disrespect for anybody in Parliament. But one thing that you learn gradually the more and more you liaise with people in government is just how reactive everything is, just how much people don't know what's going to happen next. And so, when it comes to, is there going to be another lockdown, is there going to be another lockdown for any reason, whether it's some sort of epidemic or whatever, you're probably good to go. You're probably not going to experience that within your lifetime. Hopefully, but I cannot give any certain answer. You're probably good to go because of the lessons that we've learned from COVID. I'm sure the government has a better idea of what to do next in a repeat situation. But I think you're asking the wrong question, because you're asking her basically what's going to happen next as if she knows. You meet enough MPs, you realize people don't know. People don't know. And it's nothing that has nothing to do with incompetence. It's okay to not know. It's all just a matter of the fact that everybody in government is human and is reacting. Like, people didn't know in December of 2019 in Wuhan that this thing is going to just explode.
We knew in March 2020, we knew.
Okay, fair enough. March 2020, different action, better action could have been taken. And I do understand that there are some very good faith arguments being made these days about reflecting on whether schools should have been locked down for the amount of time that it was locked down. And people are talking these days about the mental health issues that this has had on kids and the lasting impacts of that. over time. Like, there is a good faith conversation to be had there, reflecting, especially when you're putting together sort of like an emergency plan for like if something were to happen like that again. But here's the thing. If you think this was a government plot, I would say talk with federal public servants, talk with people who work in the nonpartisan side of government, ask them if they enjoyed the first few months of the pandemic, ask them if they enjoyed having their whole careers uprooted and like moving remotely to their offices in a situation where during the transition their workloads like exploded, and being in a situation where effectively they had to quickly change the norms that they had already gotten used to in terms of their work-life balance, in terms of their working day, the schedule of their working day. People in the government didn't plot that. That was a hastily developed response. And we can definitely have a conversation about whether it was the right response or whether there was the least bad response out of a series of many possible options where there really was no good response. But the point I'm trying to make is, if you think it was a plot, you don't know just how much people in government just don't know what's going to happen next, essentially.
Anyone, would you like to respond to that? No. Okay, great. So we're going to go to summative remarks, okay? And I have to say, as one of Canada's few journalists that did all the work I did on COVID, I have a million things that I want to say, but I am not going to say it because this is not a panel on COVID. So, we have had ideas on the just society. How do we achieve the just society? One of the questions in my mind that's fundamental is power, and who has power, and how do we divest power? And I think that, I would love to hear your summative reflections on the conversation that we had today, and where is the role of power in all of this? Who has power, and how do we divest the power that does exist? We'll go from left to right.
I'm going to actually ask that I just need a minute to collect my thoughts. So I'm going to invite a popcorn style, if that's okay.
Giving us back our freedoms. When you believe in something and you fight for what you believe, if you're a minority, you'll be able to change, because ideas are more powerful than an army. And when you have these good ideas because you believe in yourself first, believe in yourself and ask the government to believe in you. That's what we want to do, we, the People's Party of Canada. Thank you.
And I'll be brief. I think when we think about justice, we also need to think about justice beyond our lifetime. So I think we have to think about, I'm thinking about...
Many of us are that we should be thinking of crediting the 7 generations behind us for informing us, and thinking and planning for 7 generations at least ahead of us. And that kind of planning does mean that you actually think more collectively. The rhetoric of individual choice sounds great in isolation until you think about if everybody's operating as an individual and nobody's operating in a collective. What kind of world will that create if everybody's only...
The Western world,
if everybody is operating only as though they're concerned about themselves, then that creates a pretty hideous situation. It means that those with the greatest amount of resources, those who are the whitest, those who have the privilege and the power, are more likely to be making decisions, and that's what's led to the situation we have currently. And why would we want that? And I'm sorry, I can't hear you, but the reality is, I think we need to be operating in a more collective way and thinking beyond just our own personal, private spheres, and acting for the benefit of other people. And if we do that, we build a more just, equal, and fair society for everybody. And why wouldn't we want that? Why would we want unfairness or inequality for anybody? Why? Why would we do that?
In terms terms of getting to a just society, it's been really interesting to experience the conversation together with you, the audience, and the panelists up here. Because I think that there is tremendous wisdom in each and every one of the panelists in the audience, but I haven't felt all the way through that there is a landing of hearing each other's wisdom and each other's reality and each other's truth. So when one individual has suffered because they haven't been able to pay their condo fees and get to work, that is true suffering that needs to be heard. And so does the reality in my world, where the people I worked with who lived on the streets were dying at a rate 5 times higher of COVID. 5 times higher in the homeless sector. That is suffering.
Why homeless people became homeless. The place where I drew that information from was not Statistics Canada, it was Infrastructure Canada, and you can check it out online. It's the point in time count from 2020 to 2022. So anyway, to answer the closing question, who has power? The youth have power, the young people have power, and honestly, there is nothing you can do about it because these people will retire before I do. Ultimately, the young people are going to take up all these positions of power, all these positions that all of you have held, and obviously this isn't meant to be a slight against you, but what I am saying is that if you like me, if you like the performance that I gave here on this stage, I'm part of a youth council where full of a lot of people like me. I'm on a youth council that is fascinated by politics, interested in getting involved, interested in listening to others, creating cool ideas, and ultimately trying to implement those to put them into reality in order to try to move towards creating a just society. And I think that young people are very unique, especially from my own generation, because we are conscious of all the crises going on around the world. We are living at the forefront of the new reality of AI and social media. We strive for excellence. That's one of the most important tenets of Gen Z culture online, is that we're always constantly striving for excellence, for better and for worse. And we are doing it all during an affordability crisis, at a time when we are making the least amount of money that we will make throughout our entire careers, because we are just getting started with our professional lives. And so when I was laying out my closing remarks when I was studying for this event, I kind of wanted to end by saying that if you want to create a just society, listen to the youth. But I'd like to change my answer to say, if you want a just society, well, the youth are going to try to make it themselves. And so ultimately, thank you very much for having me. It was an honor. It was great fun. And if you want to check out the Ottawa Youth Council, visit youthottawa.com. Thank you so much.
And Ryan, what is youth? What's the age cutoff?
I don't think there's a solid cutoff. I think it's got to be like 24, 25 or so. If you want to join the Youth Council, they're always accepting applications. It's very in demand, but it gets you involved in municipal politics, which is one of my favorite kinds of politics.
Thank you so much. I don't know if any of the panel are accepting gifts. There's a gift for the senator, but we appreciate your presence. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll do it all over again tomorrow.
Hello. I'd like to present this gift to the senator. This gift is a complimentary book. It's called Elusiveness, The Rise of Canadian Hate Science. And I am the author, Regina Watil, and I have a PhD in statistics. And I'd like to present this to the senator because this book here discusses an egregious act of research fraud that was used to prop up vaccine mandates and passports. And this egregious fraud was funded by the federal government through CIHR, and it was backed by the Medical Association Journal, as well as the University of Toronto. And I would
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much for allowing me.
Freedom of speech, you must respect.
This is not over. It's a different forum. It's a different forum. I could have 20 Anyway.
Let's not leave on a
I appreciate the
jostling.
Senator.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
Thank you.
Who is she?
I have a book about interviewing rock stars.
She's the author. No. I don't know.
She's a socialist.
Oh, yeah, they are socialists.
Max,
Yeah, how are
you're
you?
one of my followers.
Oh, yeah, you must be good.
Al Tomelty.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you very
I'm
much.
sorry for embarrassing you.
No,
but
it's
I'm
okay.
glad you walked back on this policy because you realize you're just going to hamstring yourself.
Yeah, but I didn't walk back because that was not our policy.
Yeah, but, well, you said it at the beginning that you believed in the
I
full
believe in
standard.
that, but I won't impose that.
Yeah,
I
but
want,
it's wrong though. It's wrong because you realize why it's wrong because you're just limiting yourself. You're limiting your monetary policy.
I can prove my case, but here's the thing.
I don't agree with that, but it's okay. We agree not to
My
agree.
background is economics, right?
I have a question for you.
No, good for you. Go ahead.
So you realize that the rest of the world is not going to go on the gold
Yeah,
standard.
that's why I cannot impose that.
Okay, so good.
That's what I told you.
Yeah, but you're wrong on the gold standard itself.
I believe I'm right, but I agree that we don't agree.
No, but at least it's never going to be implemented.
Yeah, it
So,
won't.
so general question, just wait.
I
want to get video. Just wait.
No, what the thing is,
Here's the end of the panel. You can stay at the end of the panel.
Yeah, so to talk about, my question is, are you still in favor of the complete abolishment, even though it is proven to be unpopular, or do you prefer to renegotiate a new deal with Indigenous people?
Both. It's because it's not because it's unpopular that I want to abolish that act. That act is a racist act, and we must abolish that. And we must have a new relationship, and I want to abolish it and start on a new relationship that will be based on more autonomy for them, more responsibility. Yes, that's our proposal. Let's have a new deal and abolish that because it's a racist act, and if you speak with them, they don't like that, but they don't know what would be
Well, I
the
was
future.
born and raised in
They
Winnipeg,
don't know
and
what
a lot of them don't want it completely abolished. They want it changed.
Yeah, but they don't know.
Winnipeg. I was born in
They don't know what will be the future, so they're scared about that. Now they understand the English.
They're scared of having nothing to replace it.
Yeah,
so
but that's
are
why
you in
I'm
favor of just changing, or do you want to eliminate everything?
eliminate the English, the Act, and after that having a negotiation with them for a better relationship. And if you want to know more, it's on our website, people'spartyofcanada.ca. Click on platform, click on First Nation, and you'll be able to read our proposal.